Welcome to Hungry Dads, your guided tour through the delicate and often overwhelming balancing act between food indulgences and social acceptance. And now, as always, here are your hosts, Rod Budget and Hugh Gallen.
Hello and welcome to episode 44 of Hungry Dads. I'm Rod Budget.
I'm Hugh Gallen. Hello, hello.
Tonight we're going to talk about some strange food combinations, some perhaps dubious foods. But first, we have some late-breaking news. This just in. And Hugh Gallen, why don't you break this news for us?
DATELINE OZARK Missouri, the Lamberts House of Throwed Rolls, which we referenced in episode 29, Employees Only. It's a restaurant where you get your rolls they throw them to you from across the room. There's a guy with a basket of rolls that tosses them all over the restaurant. So, as it turns out, Lambert's House of Throwed Rolls is in the news. There's a man who is suing Lamberts for an injury as a result of a throwed roll.
Wow.
It hit him in the head. He claims, I believe, I read in one report a severed retina or a detached retina as a result of a roll to the head. So basically what his legal argument is at its core is that Lamberts knew or should have known that a throwed roll could cause this type of injury, and therefore they're responsible for it. Rod Budget, you've been a judge several times here on our show. What do you think?
Can't have any good, wholesome American fun anymore. That's what I think. I mean, come on. I think I even commented in the episode that it just sounds so, innocent and just easy and harmless, and people are chucking rolls around. And I mean, maybe if they're day-old rolls or something, I could see them getting a little harder. But that's really the only possible way I could see someone suffering an injury from a throwed roll. I'm assuming they're not throwing fastballs at people's heads. I'm picturing a nice, soft, fluffy roll, but maybe if they're stale rolls, it could have detached a retina. I'm not a medical expert. I'm not a doctor, but it just seems bogus to me.
Your stale roll theory is actually one of the better things I've heard on this. I think my instant reaction, as were many, was, look, call it the House of Throwed Rolls. You got to expect rolls to be thrown, and therefore his expectations have to play into it as well.
Yeah, what did he expect? Not to get hit in the head with a roll? I mean, come on.
Well, and that's where your stale roll theory actually adds a lot to it, because one could say he didn't expect to get hit by a stale roll. He expected fresh, soft rolls for a place that would call itself the House of Throwed Rolls. It's not the House of Throwed Stale Rolls. And so maybe there's something there. I mean, that's not in the news, but you added a fact that maybe would change my mind on this.
The first thing I thought of when you said there was a lawsuit was it was really hot or something. They threw it down some guy's shirt and it burned him or something. But I can't imagine a detached retina from a roll unless it's just hard as a rock. Yeah,
there's a couple of thoughts legally that could make this case interesting. One is there's a notion of, you take your victim as they come. That's called an eggshell victim to some extent, which means let's say you trip someone on purpose. Normally when you trip someone, they're going to fall, no big deal. But if this person happened to have a head injury already, and then their brain falls out of their head because you tripped them, that's on you. That's your responsibility. So arguably, if this person had an already partially detached retina and they chucked a roll at him, Lamberts might have take their customer as he appeared in the restaurant and then the chucking of the roll. I think that's a stretch. There's a whole series of case law about food and food liability, and one of the more landmark ones is kind of a simple case. A man was eating clam chowder, and he bit down on I think it was a piece of shell in his clam chowder. And he sued the restaurant, and the restaurant said, well, it's the clam chowder. Sometimes there's going to be shell in your clam chowder. That's what a clam is. And the court basically said, no, a customer going to a restaurant, the shell is not part of what one should expect from clam chowder, and therefore the restaurant is responsible for the shell. Now, if you apply that theory basically to the House of Throwed Rolls, I think the customer fails, because you go to the House of Throwed Rolls expecting throwed rolls.
Expecting rolls whizzing about your head, yeah.
And so, but not for the stale bread theory, I think the man has a loser. Stale bread, one thing. If the roll had a rock in it, then I think he's got a case.
Hungry Dads! Alright, now that we have our news out of the way, let's focus on some perhaps strange or unique food combinations. Let's focus on things that the majority of the population might consider strange or weird or gross. And we're going to talk about that for the rest of the episode. Let's start with the food item we referenced in episode 15, Food Fusions. And I'm talking about Goober Grape.
Ooh.
This is peanut butter, it's jelly, it's mixed together, it's in a jar, it's all in one beautiful place. Hugh Gallen.
So you say it's all in one beautiful place, and I have a jar of Goober Grape right in front of me.
As do I.
I look at the Goober Grape, and I think it is beautiful. I look at it, so it's striped. I think everyone has to have seen it at the store. If you haven't, go to your peanut butter and jelly aisle. I assume right on the edge of peanut butter and jelly lives the Goober Grape.
That's where it was in my store. It makes perfect sense. And it is beautiful. It's kind of a brown and purple candy cane. Other than the fact that it seems really cool when you're a kid, I think it was just looked cool. Like it's striking to the eye.
As I said, this is not something I had a lot as a kid, but I think what I remember is once I got it, I wasn't impressed. And one of the reasons I wasn't impressed was because the time I got it, it wasn't a fresh, new, beautiful jar. And I think we have these jars with us tonight because we're going to do a live taste test of it. And I'm anxious to see what it tastes like. But I also want to know what it's going to taste like later. So after we do our live taste test, through the magic of audio podcasting, we're going to be right back with some Goober Grape that is not fresh out of the jar. My theory on Goober Grape is that coming out of the jar, it's going to be coming kind of neat and tidy with these stripes, and then, scoop it onto my bread, and it'll probably taste fine. But I don't think I'm going to be anxious to go back into that jar with what I believe is going to be kind of a mush of grape and peanut butter all together. The next question I have is, what do I do with it next? Does it go in the cabinet or does it go in the fridge? Do you refrigerate your peanut butter?
I do not. I do not refrigerate mine. I do refrigerate my jelly.
Right.
And yeah, of course.
Right. So I was very curious to know whether or not I should refrigerate this when I'm done. Because I say to myself, I think refrigerated peanut butter is going to be too hard, but I'm not sure I trust the integrity of unrefrigerated jelly. So we did some research. Rod, I know you did as well. We got on the internet for whatever amount of time it took to get the answer. And Smucker's gave an official answer. Do you want to share that with the listeners, Rod? Do you refrigerate Goober Grape?
Officially, you do not need to refrigerate Goober Grape.
Now let me ask you, Rod, are you going to refrigerate your Goober Grape when we're done here today?
I will likely refrigerate my Goober Grape.
I feel extremely inclined to do the same. If I leave it in the cabinet for any period of time, more than a day, I'm just not sure I'm going to find that jelly appetizing.
It's a risky proposition, and here's my brief background and thoughts on Goober Grape before we dig in. If you'll recall from episode 15, I did have Goober Grape quite a bit as a kid. I came to its defense a bit, liked it as a kid, always sought it out. I thought it was cool. But now, thinking about it, analyzing it as an adult, I'm afraid that I was probably just drawn to the beauty of it. It's very eye-catching on the shelves. My hypothesis is the peanut butter is going to taste good, but this jelly, especially knowing it doesn't have to be refrigerated, I don't even know if it's true jelly. And also, for whatever reason, as an adult, I don't eat a lot of jelly, so I'm not used to it maybe. I don't know. The jelly scares me a little bit. The peanut butter I think is going to taste good.
Yeah, see, I'm kind of the opposite. I'm doubting the integrity of the peanut butter because it seems like you'd have to, in order to make it maintain that shape and the stripes without mixing into the jelly, you have to do something else to it chemically than your standard peanut butter. Because peanut butter, even on its own, it separates, it gets that oil in it to maintain this beautiful sight. I'm not sure it's going to taste right. I'm anxious to crack it open, Rod.
Yeah, let's just do it.
Okay, if I may, I like to hear the pop, so I'm gonna just pop my lid right here into the mic. There was no pop. Wow, so I just opened it. I'm looking into the top.
It's more impressive, right?
Have you
Mine's
opened
already
yours?
open. I opened mine as I came into the studio and stuck my knife in it so it would be ready to go. But it's like a star of jelly within the peanut butter. It's beautiful. I see Hugh Gallen taking a picture of it for the website. Yeah, it's aesthetically pleasing. It's beautiful, and that's what draws the kids in, and the adults apparently. I'm taking a handsome scoop onto the knife now.
Wow, so you just so unceremoniously broke the order, the blossoming peanut butter and jelly wagon wheel in the jar. You just knifed right through it.
Yeah.
Did you take a pause?
No, I just wanted to taste it, and I wanted to make sure I got a lot of each in this, just for the integrity of the experiment.
Right. So now, just as you put your knife in, did you find it easy to get a good mix without much effort? Did you have to scoop for any extra of either one?
I didn't. I kind of put my knife in the jelly because it was easier to make the knife penetrate the substance, and then, pulled towards the peanut butter, and most of the jelly integrated into the peanut butter.
Now looking at mine, the jelly is much thinner line. It's thin lines of jelly with large triangles of peanut butter. Is that what you have?
That is what I have, but I think as it gets deeper into the jar, the jelly expands. I think that's an aesthetics thing.
Got it. Okay.
I think overall it's pretty even. There might be slightly more peanut butter.
And now I have not yet dipped my knife. You found jelly is traditionally a difficult thing to spread. Did you find the jelly spreadable?
I had no problems with spreading. It integrated nicely, as I said, and it actually spread more easily than I think a separate peanut butter and jelly would.
All right, so far, aesthetically, Goober is impressive. Functionally, Goober has been impressive. Let me just do the same.
Yeah, I think it's really going to come down to the taste, which I think is key, obviously, but I think so far it's a crowd pleaser.
You're right, the jelly is smooth and not clumpy, and I mean that in a good way. The peanut butter looks gritty to me, visually speaking.
Looks gritty. I did not notice any grit, but I think taste will tell if it tastes like sand. Let's go for it.
All right, let's go. It's good. No, it's good. I was ready to be tough on it. It tastes great. I think it tastes very good, actually.
It's creamy. I like it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think I put about 50-50 peanut butter and jelly. And the peanut butter is dominating the jelly a little bit. But I think that's normal for a peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
Yeah. No, I was ready to be very critical. But now I'll say, I'm looking at my partially used jar. It is not a mess. As you dig a little deeper, everything starts to get a little less consistent. And if you swirl it around, it's definitely a mess. But the taste was good. Good.
It's tastier than expected. I see why I liked it as a kid.
Now, as I said, I'm inclined to refrigerate it. I know Smuckers has said I don't have to, but I want to. I don't think I'll eat it if I don't. So I'm ready to refrigerate mine. And through the magic of podcasting, we'll be back with some refrigerated Goober, and we'll give that a try. So listeners, to what seemed like an instant to you, for us, actually a fair amount of time has passed, and we've put our Goober Grape in the refrigerator, and we've retrieved it because I really wanted to see how appetizing Goober Grape might be after a little bit of time, and how it might be in a different state, not that fresh from the shelf sensation. So, Rod, any instant impressions from your Goober Grape?
The chemical state has definitely been altered. It's, as you would imagine, a little more congealed. It looks like the grape and peanut butter are a little more integrated. Maybe the jelly just kind of oozed into the peanut butter while it was in the fridge. I don't know. Obviously, they have different consistencies and chemical makeup.
What I did before I put mine away, I decided to be a little less precious with my Goober Grape. And I went ahead and just stuck the knife in and gave it a swirl as if I would any other jar of anything else. Which is to say, when I first went into it the first time, it had that beautiful pattern. And I was very careful about the way I scooped out my peanut butter as to try to maintain the design. I thought, well, maybe that's not real world.
I think it could go either way. I think it's like, how do you eat an Oreo? I think it's, how do you eat your Goober Grape? Do you swirl it or do you keep the integrity?
Right. And so just for the experiment, I decided to go ahead and just swirl it. And it's significantly less appetizing that way. It makes a big difference. It's all mushed together.
Yeah.
So while you were talking, I went ahead, I took some out, and I spread it on bread. And I will say, it spread fine. I thought the peanut butter might be too hard to spread, but it went on just fine. So no complaint there. Aesthetically, it's less pleasing.
As I took it out of the jar, it was harder to get out slightly, but nothing major.
I think I've reached a conclusion of my theory, but I'm gonna take a bite first, and then I'll see if I can share what my final thoughts are on it.
I will take a bite as well. The chilled jelly tastes better to me, and the chilled peanut butter tastes not as good, which is what you might expect, because traditionally you chill down jelly and you don't chill down peanut butter. Some people do, I don't. So it kind of is in line with what I would expect.
If you have the choice between Goober Grape or a jar of jelly and a jar of peanut butter of similar quality each, what would you choose?
I would say the Goober Grape has a convenience factor, for sure. But I would probably still choose these separate jars, because it's a little easier to control your portions of each if you like a little more of one over the other. And you can get, obviously different brands of whatever it might be.
So, as a final thought, if we go back to my initial comments, in episode 15, I recounted a story in which, as a child, I always wanted Goober Grape, and then I finally got to have it at a friend's house, and I was let down when I saw kind of how messy it was. And I think after now having experienced it myself and tasting it now, I've locked in on the theory. I don't know about you, Rod, but when you're visiting someone else's house, sometimes the food it's not familiar to you, where it came from, the presence of it. So I'm willing to guess that the Goober Grape skeeved me, if for no other reason, that it just wasn't in my house. If I look objectively at this messy jar of Goober Grape, I know I messed it up. I made that whole swirling, gross pattern, and so I'm okay eating it.
Right.
But if I saw this at your house, Rod, no offense, I might take a pass. It just looks like a mess. It just looks like you just indiscriminately mixed two things together that don't belong together in a jar. And for that reason, I'd go for the turkey at your house. But knowing that I created this, it tastes good, looks good, and I think that was the problem.
I think we're opposite in that when I'm at someone else's house, if I see something, not necessarily gross looking, because that's a different story, but if I see something new, I kind of am interested. And I feel like food in someone else's house is more intriguing and it tastes better for some reason because it's kind of a novelty. It's like you're on vacation eating.
Oh no, I've questioned the origins and the storage.
Hungry Dads!
Apple pie without cheese is like a kiss without a squeeze. So Rod, this little rhyme showed up in an issue of Superman comics that I was reading about 20 years ago. So go ahead and do the math. I'm in my 30s now. I was in my 20s or late teens at the time reading Superman comics. But nonetheless, it was said by a character named Pa Kent, who's Superman's dad. Clark Kent's dad is Pa Kent. And he lived in Smallville, Texas. And he had this comment about apple pie with cheddar cheese. And it caught my attention, but then Superman went off and fought the aliens or whatever, and they never got back to this cheese storyline that I'd gotten so invested in.
That's a shame.
The line stuck with me. We mentioned in Hungry Dad's episode 15, entitled Food Fusions. I had called it a, quote, culinary curiosity, but we didn't say much more about it. So we and our listeners were left wondering, is that a thing? Where did it come from? Where is it popular, if it's popular anywhere? What's the appeal? Well, I've done some research, and this is what I learned. Cheddar cheese on apple pie is a thing. Its origins are shrouded in mystery, some noting early European cheese desserts, but there's no talk of cheese and apple pie specifically. And apple pie is an American thing, if my junior high history taught me anything. The web, blogs, articles, comments on the internet all alluded to apple pie and cheddar cheese being a rare thing, but anyone who'd heard of it claimed that it was a Boston thing, or a North Carolina thing, or a Midwest thing, or a Vermont thing, a Texas thing, or a Canadian thing. So, for all my research, as the web sometimes does, it gave every answer and no answer at the same time. I found from some people on the internet that the appeal of cheddar cheese and apple pie might be that sharp cheddar brings out the flavor in baked apples, or that the tang and crunch of the apples with the softness and flavor of the cheese is, quote, a nice play on the taste buds. Some said it should be melted on top of a warm slice of apple pie. Other people broil it on top of the whole pie at the end of the baking process, or even bake it into the crust.
Wow.
So tonight, Rod, we each have some apple pie with us and some cheddar cheese, am I right?
You are correct.
Tonight, I'm going to be taking one of the other recommended forms, which is a slice of apple pie and next to it a block of cheese, and I'm going to take alternating bites. This seems like a good way to control the flavor ratio and potentially optimize any enjoyment of this, if there's any enjoyment at all. So I was hoping to find a little bit more about this thing. It's out there, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of people claiming it to be their favorite. It's a lot of people saying, oh, my dad ate this. Oh, I know people who ate this. Oh, I've heard of this. But very few direct reviews of it.
Yeah, I had the same experience. I asked probably 4 or 5 people, friends, acquaintances, family. Most of them had heard of it, but hadn't tried it themselves. I think it may be from an older generation and kind of has gotten lost as people have evolved away from cheese and pie.
My pie is in slice and chunk form. Rod, what's your pie look like?
My pie, I have melted a nice sharp cheddar cheese right over the top of the slice. So I have gone with the hot pie with the melted cheddar.
So having heard no firsthand accounts, Rod, we're going to taste test this phenomenon now. What do you expect? Do you have any theories?
So it's similar when we had Johnny Prime on, our listeners may recall, and I made the hillbilly nachos, and I made the statement that separately I liked all of the ingredients, and then I started thinking about it, and my initial reaction was it's going to be gross, but then I was like, no, this might be really good. I like all these ingredients. It's a little unique, but it might taste good. And that's kind of a similar mindset. This is obviously less complex, but I'm a huge fan of a sharp cheddar cheese. Obviously, apple pie is delicious. And trying to picture the flavors together, there's something about it that is kind of appealing that I do think might be nice. But at the same time, with the hillbilly nachos, I ended up being kind of grossed out. So I'm a little leery.
Refresh everyone on the hillbilly nachos, because this is a comparison I didn't expect, but I think it's apt. What were the hillbilly nachos again?
Hillbilly nachos were cheap barbecue potato chips, coleslaw, and the canned easy cheese, which I'm a big fan of all of them. You can listen back for my review, my taste test review. But basically, I enjoyed the coleslaw and chips together, but when I got to the easy cheese, it kind of grossed me out because it integrated with the coleslaw. And I don't know if that will happen with the apple pie, because I think it's easier to imagine. There are two foods that I've eaten more often, and it's kind of easier to imagine them going together, but I could be way off again.
Yeah, the reason it's an interesting comparison is because the hillbilly nachos struck me as kind of a crass experiment. The ingredients called hillbilly nachos, I think part of it was meant to shock. Maybe it's because I've heard of it for so long and my view of it's evolved over time, but the apple pie and cheddar cheese, I get that it's weird, and most people's first response has been, oh, that sounds kind of gross. But there's something elegant about it. I don't know. I've been at, events that are supposed to be nice, and you see cheese and you see fruit on the same plate. It's not crazy. And so apple pie, which is kind of a more down-home version of fruit, and cheddar cheese, which is kind of a middle America version of cheese, it's these down-to-earth versions of this fancy combination. It makes some sense to me. So I'm ready to dive into mine. I'm actually pretty excited too. I have my pie and my cheese at room temperature each. Like I said, in alternating bites, I'm going to take a bite of my apple pie, and then as I'm chewing the apple pie, I'm going to take a bite of my cheese.
My pie and cheese are both still piping hot, so I may very well injure myself on air. But I will wait for Hugh's reaction. He's chewing now. Looks like he took some pie, now he's taking some cheese.
Okay. So at first, the cheese gets lost in the pie.
It's interesting.
For a long time, I'm just eating pie. The cheese is in my mouth. I'm chewing it. I'm not tasting it.
That's interesting because a sharp cheddar cheese is a pretty bold flavor. It's hard to imagine it getting lost.
Mm-hmm. It's very lost until I'm swallowing, and then I taste the cheese, and then the aftertaste is of the cheese, and the whole thing's it's pleasant.
Interesting.
It's not an amazing sensation that I'd go insisting that everyone do, but it tastes kind of fancy. I don't know. Rod, I'm anxious for you to give it a try.
I'm now going to dig into my melted sharp cheddar with a hot apple pie. I
see Rod chewing.
Yeah, similar. I think you described it pretty well. The cheese somehow gets hidden behind the apple taste, which I wouldn't have thought would happen, just kind of thinking of the two flavors. And then when you swallow, the cheese kind of comes out. I'm going to take another bite before I make any definitive statements. Yeah, I don't particularly like it. I don't think it's offensive, but I think I would prefer apple pie just by itself. I think the pie is delicious. The cheese, I mean, it tastes fine. It tastes like cheddar cheese, which I like, but I don't think it adds anything in this environment, honestly.
Hungry Dads!
So when talking about unique food flavors or combinations, we thought it would be interesting to look back at our childhoods. And I think children in general like to experiment with food and come up with their own unique flavors, and sometimes maybe just like weird stuff. Hugh and I, before the show, this won't be a live thing, actually prepared and consumed some unique food things that we liked as kids. And I actually phoned up Mama Budget earlier this week and got her take on some things. I kind of had some things in the back of my mind that maybe I liked, but consulting her was good. She said some pretty general stuff, like you generally like to experiment and mix things together and, you know, mustard with mayonnaise with soy sauce type stuff. But then she said, actually, when you were, 5, 6, 7, your favorite thing was mixed together Vienna sausages and mandarin oranges.
Whoa! Oh,
yeah,
this is perfect. Thank you, Mrs. Budget, for this intelligence. Perfect for this episode. Exactly what we're looking for. Now, do you remember Vienna sausages and mandarin oranges, Rod Budget?
Maybe after she said it, maybe somewhere in the dark recesses of my mind, very, very vaguely, but no real concrete memories of them. So it was a really long time ago, but she says that it's really all I would eat for like a year. And it was horrifying to hear just from the standpoint that I spent a year of my life eating this stuff and knowing that obviously once I heard that, this has got to be what I prepare and consume and report back on. So I assume it sounds like you're familiar with Vienna sausage.
Illuminate me a little bit, because I think I know, but I think there's a lot more I could learn about them. And again, just for our listeners to be clear, we didn't just take a trip down memory lane. We just ate these. We just tried these. We relived our childhood, so we're going to get to his review in a second, but give us a quick primer on Vienna sausages, Rod.
Yeah, I had the same reaction. I kind of knew what they were, but not really, even though I ate them all the time as a kid. I knew they came in a can, but I was like, are these really sausages? What are they? So I went and found them in the canned meat section, next to the Spam and things like that. They are Vienna sausages. Hormel's a big maker, and Libby's. I went with the Libby's. It was a penny cheaper. It was 72 cents versus 71 cents. These are not high-priced items.
I would tend to go for the higher quality Vienna sausages, even at a penny, but you make your own call.
I saved a penny. So Vienna sausages are chicken parts and some other kind of things in water. It's kind of like bologna, I think, but in sausage shape. I don't really think they have anything to do with sausage other than the shape, and it's a bunch of stuff kind of thrown together, maybe a la hot dog. So they come in a can. There are 4 little sausage-type things in a can, preserved in a little bit of water or maybe preservative juice. I don't know what they were. Mandarin oranges were also canned. My mom stressed that they were canned oranges. They weren't in these, newfangled cups in 100% fruit juice. These were hardcore.
In syrup.
In the syrup.
Nice.
Yep. So I think our listeners are probably more familiar with those. I don't know why I mixed them together, I guess. My only other question before I get into my actual reactions is, do people in Austria really eat these things? Are these from Vienna? It's just an odd name if it's not. And I picture, much like the apple pie and cheddar being kind of a nicer, high quality item. I picture Austrians eating, good food.
Yeah.
Do you think this is a Vienna thing? I did no research on it.
No, I think like French fries and Swiss Miss chocolate. These are American inventions trying to make terrible food sound exotic. Not that French fries are terrible.
So, as we mentioned, I had the mandarin oranges and Vienna sausages mixed together earlier today, and there's no surprises here. It was gross. It was awful. I can't believe that I used to eat them. I will say the oranges they're fine. They're kind of super sweet, kind of cheap-tasting orange-flavored things. I mean, if I ate them alone, like a few of them, I wouldn't be grossed out. The Vienna sausages they're just rank. They're bad. I can't believe it.
So, Rod, how did you prepare them? I mean, I'll get you. I'll get this far before we don't know what happens next. You opened each can, and then
Right. I drained the juice out of the mandarin oranges, drained the quote unquote juice out of the sausages, and I ate these sausages out of the can as a kid, so I had to stay true to the experiment.
cold.
There are 4 of them. Yeah. Well, they're like room temperature-ish
That's worse,
kind
I
of.
think.
It's worse. Yeah, it probably is. I kind of like mixed them together on a paper plate and
Okay.
just took like 1 orange and a bite of sausage at the same time.
Did you put each on the same fork with the same bite?
I used my hands. I was trying as a kid. Of course, I used my
Okay.
hands. Here's what I did. I pinned because the oranges are very small, even compared to the sausages. It's like it probably takes 3 oranges to make up 1 sausage. So I kind of pinned the orange to the end of a sausage and took a bite of both. I will admit, I only ate 1 Vienna sausage with some oranges. I didn't eat the whole thing. If I had a dog, I would have definitely fed the Vienna sausages to the dog. I think it's something a dog would really appreciate in a canine, but not a human.
Hungry Dads.
We had a weekly spaghetti night at my house, and for whatever reason, I didn't like spaghetti sauce. So I put on my spaghetti a slice of American cheese. So far, so good. Nothing crazy. And then just a bunch of ketchup. So, Rod, if you want to give a reaction, in our Hungry Dads files, there is a photograph of what I prepared 2 nights ago. Pull it up, take a look.
Yeah, I'm a little scared. I don't think it's going to be pretty, but I'm pulling it up now, and it looks pretty gross, honestly.
So, the way I would prepare it was, there's the hot spaghetti my mom would make. There's a pot of sauce on the stove that I didn't touch. Basically, I'd take the square of American cheese, throw it in the microwave, let it get melted on top, and then I'd squirt ketchup on the top. And as a kid, I squirted a lot of ketchup on there, an inordinate amount of ketchup. Do your kids eat ketchup, Rod?
Every once in a while, we'll let them have ketchup. They love ketchup, but it's kind of a treat, but they like it.
Yeah, I mean, our kids, when it's available, they have an insatiable taste for ketchup. We try to give it to them in controlled servings, but they pretty much will finish a healthy serving of ketchup and only have eaten 2 or 3 of their pieces of chicken. They'll just keep scooping it up and licking it off and scooping it up and licking it off. So I have a memory of this taste, and I recreated it a few nights ago at home. Now, when I recreated it, I know that I took it easy on the ketchup as compared to my 7-8-year-old self. But what I did was I melted the cheese on the spaghetti, squirted some ketchup on there, and then I basically start mixing it. I mix it and stir it and mix it and stir it till the cheese is distributed evenly throughout and the ketchup is distributed evenly throughout. So it mixes the red with the yellow and you get a vague orange slime over top of your spaghetti.
See, to me, somehow that sounds better. Like, it sounds like it'll be better if it's all mixed together versus just kind of a blob of ketchup on top.
It dilutes the ketchup into the other ingredients and makes it less ketchup-centric. And I think you hit on it. So I ate it, I tasted it, and honestly, it wasn't all that bad. It reminded me of, number one, it reminded me of what I used to eat when I was a kid. But number two, you know what? It tasted kind of like SpaghettiOs. SpaghettiOs, look, that tomato sauce is basically just ketchup. They add a little bit of flavoring in there, probably the same stuff you find in a slice of American cheese. So my ultimate review is not as bad as you'd think. I wouldn't recommend it. In my house, we use a particularly healthy spaghetti sauce. We actually make it ourselves. We grind up extra vegetables into it to make sure we all get our vegetables. I would say so the kids get their vegetables, but including me too. We crock pot up some tomatoes. We throw some spinach in there, some other things. We blend it all up so it is tomato sauce, but it's got hidden vegetables in it. Replacing that with ketchup and American cheese is a step away from health there. So I don't recommend it for your kids, but on the deliciousness scale, yeah, it fit the bill.
Hungry Dads.
Rod, to wrap things up tonight, I'm going to play a pre-recorded segment, something we recorded a few months ago that unfortunately just had to hit the cutting room floor. We recorded so much good stuff on that show that we didn't put it in. But I held on to it, and I had the opportunity with some extra time to listen to it again. And I love our podcast. I love our format. I love the give and take we have. but I listen to a lot of podcasts. In fact, when you first suggested we do a podcast, Rod, I said, can we do a podcast where we review other podcasts? Because I love food. I love podcasts. Those are probably two of my favorite things. And we opted to review food, which I think was smarter. And as we heard from a few episodes ago, I love podcasts. I gave a review of several podcasts if you haven't heard that episode. There's a couple of podcasts that are my favorites, and I want to mention them now. One is 99% Invisible, which I mention all the time on the show. And the other is Radiolab. The thing about each of these podcasts is that they are beautiful to listen to. They have a sound quality and a oral sensation, if you will, that is just, it's musical, but it's not music. They add tweaks and sounds, and I don't want to say sound effects, because that sounds like, if I say the word chicken, you're going to hear a chicken bark bark. That's not what they do. They just add little clicks and tones throughout the show that really keep you engaged. And so what I did with this segment was I just tried my best, and it's a poor attempt compared to these wonderful shows, 99% Invisible, Radiolab, check them out. But this is my homage to them by just taking our conversation and just adding some subtle nuance to the storytelling podcast medium. I hope you enjoy it. Rod, for fans of our website, after our Thanksgiving episode, I wrote a little essay about my turducken. I made a turducken, and I started off that essay talking about my high school driver's ed teacher. I remember him saying that anyone who says they can't cook is just full of it, because all you have to do to cook is follow a recipe.
Episode 14, I remember you telling this.
So, Rod, for all of our talking about food, we don't actually talk about cooking all that much. A few weeks ago, I was just trying to clear out the kitchen, and we had just a little bit of sauce in like 5 or 6 different bottles. I had some mango chutney, half a pack of taco seasoning, black bean sauce, duck sauce, about 8 ketchup packets. And taking my high school driver's ed teacher advice to heart that anyone can be a cook, and I could probably just take all these sauces and put them in the slow cooker. And so I made this pork. It turned out fine. In that same kitchen cleanup, there was also some half and half that was starting to get a little old in the kitchen, and some eggs that were kind of near the end of their life. And there was this random little bag of whole wheat flour. I refuse to throw anything away, and I'm an experimenter by nature, and my driver's ed teacher told me I could cook, and I'll eat almost anything. So I took this half and half and this egg and this flour and mixed it together. Not sure what it would turn into, and it turned into dough.
Yeah.
I put it on a pan and I baked it. Now, it came out, only I can describe as hardtack. And if you don't know what hardtack is, it's what Civil War soldiers used to eat. They used to make this very dense bread that they'd give to the soldiers, and it wouldn't spoil, and it didn't have much water in it, and it was easy and cheap to make. So I had effectively made hardtack.
Wow, did you eat it all?
So this is where it gets interesting. I had this horrible bread. I chopped up my hardtack. I thought, what would happen if I took that and simmered it in the juice of my pork?
Yeah.
And I made a fascinating and fairly tasty dumpling stuffing type substance that I served to my kids. And I'm not going to lie and say it was their favorite thing in the world, but they ate it.
Yeah.
And to them, it looked like something, it looked normal. They didn't know what it was.
Pork dumpling, yeah, of course. Pork dumpling, yeah, of course.
Mrs. Gallen was more than a little skeptical about this. And so she tasted it. She didn't love it. I mean, she knew what had gone together to make this. But my kids, they didn't know any better. So
they had no preconceived notions.
As a quick epilogue, I like the experimentation aspect of what I did here. But I do often find, and I've done this kind of thing before, that in the end, I'm the only one who will eat what comes out. My kids fell for it a little bit. Or I'm afraid to share. Like, this is nothing I would ever serve with anybody. But I actually hate following recipes. I get bored with it. I was online on a message board, and I want to give a shout out to another poster on some of these message boards. The name is Vuppy.
Vuppy?
Vuppy.
Vuppy?
Vuppy.
Vuppy?
Vuppy.
Vuppy?
Vuppy.
Vuppy?
Vuppy.
Vuppy?
Vuppy gave this great piece of advice that I'm going to start following. And the advice was, when you have, I thought this was a great idea. When you have a recipe, just read it once, put it away, and then go to the kitchen and start cooking. And don't look at it again. And I'm going to start doing this, and I think I like it because I think it's going to give me the guidance of a recipe, but still give me that flair for experimentation. So a shout out to Vuppy for this great advice.
Between your driver's ed teacher and Vuppy, you will be a master chef soon. Hungry Dads. Visit our website at hungrydads.com. Follow us on Twitter at hungry_dads. This has been a Hungry Dads production.
I've got a lot.
What?
I've got a lot of pie in my mouth. And a lot of cheese.